Hey you, what are you doing out there? You're looking at me with a puzzling stare. Though I'm not as professional as most channels go, I'd like to welcome you to my show. I'm Sandy Allen, the charismatic host, talking about weird media that interests me the most. So hang on to your seats and don't get too drunk. I've got distant cassettes you've probably thrown in the junk. To keep you waiting any longer, that would be a sin. This is the Sandy Allen Show, so let's begin right now.
Oh, hello there. I'm Sandy Allen. Though he did not have a particularly good reputation, both during his lifetime and after his death, there's no denying that Roald Dahl is one of the most prolific storytellers who ever lived. He has inspired so many people to make up their own stories, myself included. I've got a few ideas for stories which I hope to get published soon. And when your books are as popular as his are, it's kind of a given that they'll be adapted into different forms of media somehow. There's been a surprising number of different audiobooks, different versions of audiobooks made of his stories, and it got me thinking, which version is the best? So I did a bit of research and I listened to each version, some of which I actually have myself, others I don't. Some are unfortunately very hard to find online, and others, sadly, have become lost media. For this video, I'm not including the CDs that were billed as fully dramatised recordings, which were produced for some newspaper. I think it was the Daily Telegraph. I want to say they were made in the late 90s, but I can't quite be sure. My sister used to listen religiously to their interpretation of George's Marvellous Medicine. I always found it a bit too much for me. It was a lot for my little ears to take in. Even the Dr. Seuss readings left time for the listener to breathe. And usually, I love audio dramatisations. The BBC's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is one of my favourites. Also, for the record, I'm going to try not to get too worked up about the inclusive rewrites they did recently. I hate that word anyway. As you can tell, I'm very against all this. It's positively Stalinist. I hope nobody edits the books I write like this. Whew, right, now I've got that out of the way, let's begin. In a curious case of life imitating art, or probably the other way round, Roald Dahl used to put a ladder up outside his granddaughter Sophie's bedroom window, whom he named the book's heroine after, and push a bamboo cane through her window and blow through it, pretending to be the BFG, blowing dreams into her bedroom. The only thing I think that would make this book even more whiz-popping would be a gobblefunk dictionary, as my grasp on gobblefunk is absolutely ucky slush. First things first, Jeremy Bulloch and Amanda Root, who reprised their roles from the 1989 film. At first glance, this doesn't seem like the sort of book that would work with two narrators. And unfortunately, it doesn't, as it sort of gives off the impression that they're interrupting each other.
Bone-crunching giant crunches up 2 wopsy-whiffling human beings for supper every night. Noise is ear-bursting. Noise of crunching bones goes crackety-crack for miles around.
Ouch!
Bone-crunching giant only gobbles human beings from Turkey.
Why Turks?
Bone Cruncher says Turkish human beings has a glamourly flavour.
Next up, Geoffrey Palmer. His voice for the BFG seems a little bit flat, but I do like the way he interprets the bad giants.
I is Slop Groggard, squawked the gizzard gulper. I is Crod Squinkled, yowled the blood bottler. I is Bop Muggard, screeched the butcher boy.
Natasha Richardson not only injects emotion, indignation and humour into her voices, but she somehow has that amazing talent of making no two parts of the book sound alike, which is very hard to do when you're reading an audiobook.
The giant, if that's what he was wearing a long black cloak and in one hand he was holding what looked like a very long, thin trumpet. In the other hand he held a large suitcase. The giant had stopped now right in front of Mr. and Mrs. Gucci's house.
I find myself struggling to say anything negative about David Walliams' narration. It's absolutely scrumdiddlyumptious. And the voice he does for the flesh lump eater is reminiscent to the one he does for Bert from his own book, Ratburger.
Put that human being down, the BFG shouted. The flesh lump eater turned and stared at the BFG. What is you doing here, with all these grotty twiglets? He bellowed. You is making me very suspicious.
Also, I found another reading of the BFG on Amazon, read by Samantha Bond. I'm not sure when it came out. It says either 2014 or 2024. But the reading itself is pretty satisfactory for what it is.
A brilliant moonbeam was slanting through a gap in the curtains. It was shining right onto her pillow. The other children in the dormitory had been asleep for hours. Sophie closed her eyes and lay quite still.
Mel Gedroich doesn't actually do too badly here and injects some of her signature quirky humour into it.
Sophie had never known such a silence. Perhaps, she told herself, this was what they called the witching hour. The witching hour, somebody had once whispered to her, was a special moment in the middle of the night when every child and every grown-up was in a deep, deep sleep. And all the dark things came out from hiding and had the world to themselves.
So the best reading of the BFG, in my opinion, I think I'd like to give it to David Walliams, but Natasha Richardson's very good too. I'm gonna call it a tie. The best children's books are told through the eyes of a child. This is one such book, and it really makes you sympathise with the title character, as a lot of the adults in the book are either not good listeners or rather hypocritical at times. I know exactly how Matilda feels, as I myself have had to deal with hypocrisy almost on a weekly basis. Miriam Margolyes relishes in reading out the gorgeously creative insults in the story, so you can imagine she sounds excellent as Miss Trunchbull.
I have discovered, Miss Honey, during my long career as a teacher, that a bad girl is a far more dangerous creature than a bad boy. Nasty, dirty things little girls are. Glad I never was one.
Jolie Richardson's reading is pretty alright, but she can sound rather monotonous at times and does end up making some of the characters sort of sound the same as each other.
Daddy, she said, do you think you could buy me a book? A book, he said. What do you want a flaming book for? To read, Daddy. What's wrong with the telly, for heaven's sake? We've got a lovely telly with a 12-inch screen, and now you come asking for a book. You're getting spoilt, my girl.
Kate Winslet's narration is almost on par with the 1996 film as the best telling of this story. Miss Trunchbull has a Yorkshire accent in this version.
This blackhead, this foul carbuncle, this poisonous pustule that you see before you is none other than a disgusting criminal, a denizen of the underworld, a member of the mafia.
And Baz Matilda's parents are apparently from Essex.
Who is it? The woman said, not looking round. Some school teacher, Mr. Wormwood said. She says she's got to talk to us about Matilda. He crossed to the TV set and turned down the sound, but left the picture on the screen. Don't do that, Harry! Mrs. Wormwood cried out. Willard is just about to propose to Angelica! You can still watch it while we're talking, Mr. Wormwood said. This is Matilda's teacher. She says she's got some sort of news to give us.
Daisy Ridley does excellently and lends that warm and relaxing vocal tone of hers to this story.
Or, if I were feeling lyrical that day, I might write,
It is a curious truth that grasshoppers have their hearing organs in the sides of the abdomen. Judging by what your daughter Vanessa has learnt this term, this fact alone is more interesting than anything I have taught in the classroom. I might even delve deeper into natural history and say, the periodical cicada spends 6 years as a grub underground and no more than 6 days as a free creature of sunlight and air. Your son Wilfred has spent 6 years as a grub in this school, and we are still waiting for him to emerge from the chrysalis.
And I can't find the readings by Jenny Hanley or Jean Marsh. Aww. So who's the best reader of Matilda? I think I already said it earlier, it's Kate Winslet. Kind of gave the game away there, but really, why shouldn't I have? Now we're going back in time for Roald Dahl's first ever children's novel. This may have been a fantasy novel and it works very well as one, but even as a child I knew rhinoceroses were flipping herbivores. I'm only going to say this once, because this applies to all the audiobooks narrated by Dahl himself. For the longest time, I had no idea when these were recorded, as the copyright date on them said 2005, which was 15 years after he died. And bizarrely, they're published by HarperCollins, and they don't even publish his books anymore, because they gave them all to Penguin Books Limited in the mid to late 90s. Obviously, there's not much in the way of production. They must have just set him up with a microphone in the hut that he had at the bottom of his garden, probably. Not being an actor, Dahl does not emote much, but that's what makes them work. And they're not dramatisations, but they feel very real, almost like a grandfather reading a bedtime story to his grandchildren. They feel as though he's really there, in your bedroom, reading to you and only you, which, now that I think about it, would be a little bit weird.
Why, you lazy, good-for-nothing brute, Aunt Spiker shouted. Beat him, cried Aunt Sponge. I certainly will, Aunt Spiker snapped. She glared at James, and James looked back at her with large, frightened eyes. I shall beat you later on in the day when I don't feel so hot, Aunt Spiker said. And now get out of my sight, you disgusting little worm, and give me some peace.
I only found this one right at the last minute while I was editing this video. It's from CBBC's Jackanory, more on that show a little later, but Kenneth Williams reads it in that absolutely hilarious and slightly manic style that you'd expect him to give.
You mustn't be frightened,
the ladybird said kindly.
We wouldn't dream of hurting you.
James, the centipede said. Your name is James, isn't it? Yes. Well, James, have you ever in your life seen such a marvellous, colossal centipede as me? I certainly haven't, said James. How on earth did you get to be like that? Very peculiar, the centipede said. Very, very peculiar indeed. Let me tell you what happened. I was messing about in the garden under the old peach tree, and suddenly a funny little green thing came wriggling past my nose. Bright green it was, and extraordinarily beautiful.
Andrew Zachs does gloriously silly and overly exaggerated voices for a lot of the characters, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker in particular, which was something he was well known for in his most famous character.
Manuel Towers, how are you? It's nice today. Good. Goodbye.
He gives a better performance here than he did when he read the Judith Kerr-Mogg books. I mean, they're all right for what they are, but he doesn't really use that manic style that's so associated with him.
We shall make a fortune today, Aunt Spiker was saying. Just look at all those people. I wonder what became of that horrid little boy of ours last night, Aunt Sponge said. He never did come back in, did he? Oh, he probably fell down in the dark and broke his leg, Aunt Spiker said. Or his neck, maybe, Aunt Sponge said hopefully. Just wait till I get my hands on him, Aunt Spiker said, waving her cane. He'll never want to stay out all night again by the time I've finished with him. Good gracious me, what's that awful noise?
Jeremy Irons and Julian Rhind-Tutt both do excellent voices for James's insect friends.
Poor James was still slaving away at the chopping block. The heat was terrible. He was sweating all over. His arm was aching. The chopper was a large, blunt thing, far too heavy for a small boy to use. And as he worked, James began thinking about all the other children in the world and what they might be doing at this moment.
Well, most certainly not, said the earthworm. You must be crazy. You can't eat the ship. It's the only thing that is keeping us up. We shall starve if we don't, said the centipede. And we shall drown if we do, cried the earthworm. Oh dear, said the old green grasshopper. Now we're worse off than before. Couldn't we just eat a little bit of it? Asked Miss Spider. I am so dreadfully hungry.
James Acaster, most likely picked because of his first name, reads the story in his usual deadpan style. But that doesn't really work as well.
Until he was 4 years old, James Henry Trotter had a happy life. He lived peacefully with his mother and father in a beautiful house beside the sea. There were always plenty of other children for him to play with, and there was the sandy beach for him to run about on and the ocean to paddle in. It was the perfect life for a small boy.
The winner, for me, it's clear that it has to go to the OG, Roald Dahl himself. I used to listen to that a lot when I had one of those little iPod touches. Is that what they're called? iPod touches? You know, the ones with they're very small and thin, and they have the round circly thing and the little screen. I should probably shut up by now. You're probably getting bored. I don't want to ramble on. Let's about something that doesn't even relate to Roald Dahl. Let's go on to the next book then. Another fabulous Dahl story adapted into another favourite film of mine by the genius Wes Anderson. Annoyingly, I can't find the readings by either John Baddeley or Lionel Jeffries, but I bet they're really good. I expect a lot from Martin Jarvis. Obviously, I love the guy. He did excellent readings of Jeeves and Wooster and Just William. And let me tell you, he did not disappoint here.
I want that fox. I'm going to get that fox. I'm not giving in till I've strung him up over my front porch, dead as a dumpling. We can't get him by digging, that's for sure, said the fat Boggis. I've had enough of digging. Bunce, the little pot-bellied dwarf, looked up at Bean and said, Have you got any more stupid ideas, then? What? Said Bean. I can't hear you.
Chris O'Dowd, although he reads the story very calmly, does very funny voices for each of the characters.
Did we get him? Said Bean. One of them shone a flashlight on the hole, and there on the ground, in the circle of light, half in and half out of the hole, lay the poor, tattered, blood-stained remains of a fox's tail. Bean picked it up. We got the tail, but we missed the fox, he said, tossing the thing away. Dang him blast, said Boggis. We shot too late. We should have let fly the moment he poked his head out. He won't be poking it out again in a hurry, Bunce said.
Adrian Lester does just fine in his recording. I expected it to be better, but you know what? To quote Dodgy, if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for me.
Down in the valley, there were 3 farms. The owners of these farms had done well. They were rich men. They were also nasty men. All 3 of them were about as nasty and mean as any men you could meet. Their names were Farmer Boggis, Farmer Bunce, and Farmer Bean.
So the winner of this one? I'm probably going to say, Martin Jarvis. But Chris O'Dowd is not far behind. This one's probably my favourite book of Dahl's. It's hilarious, mischievous, and downright ridiculous. I mean, just look at these 2 gozzle-trampers.
Oh, yes!
And perhaps one of the best things about it is the way that playing a harmless prank on someone is treated as some kind of war crime. Although it did put me off standing upside down for fear that I'd get the dreaded shrinks. But overall it has a lovely message towards the beginning. If you have good thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams and you will always look lovely. Followed rather flatly by nothing shone out of Mrs. Twits' face. Roger Blake's reading isn't all that bad. He carries the story very well.
Do you know how to talk to these English birds? Muggle Wump asked him. Of course I do, said the roly-poly bird. It's no good going to a country and not knowing the language.
I used to listen to the Simon Callow reading on repeat whenever I couldn't sleep. So, predictably, I have an enormous bias towards that version, as Simon is an absolute legend.
Mr. Twit led Mrs. Twit outdoors, where he had everything ready for the great stretching. He had 100 balloons and lots of string. He had a gas cylinder for filling the balloons. He had fixed an iron ring into the ground. "Stand here," he said, pointing to the iron ring.
Quite a few years later, I heard the Richard Ayoade reading, and unfortunately it isn't nearly as good. He sounds very bored reading it, and when he does the voices for the two titular characters, he talks very monotonously.
"I'll wipe that silly laugh off your beaks," Mr. Twit screamed at the birds. "I'll get you next time, you filthy feathery frumps. I'll wring your necks, the whole lot of you, and have you bubbling in the pot for bird pie before this day is out."
How are you going to do that?
asked Mrs. Twit, who had come outside to see what all the noise was about.
I won't have you smearing sticky glue all over the roof of our house.
Sarah Pascoe is not the first choice I would have picked. I'm more used to hearing the Twits read by a man, but Pascoe adds her own personal touch to it, and I must give her praise for it.
When a man grows hair all over his face, it is impossible to tell what he really looks like. Perhaps that's why he does it. He'd rather you didn't know. Then there's the problem of washing. When the very hairy ones wash their faces, it must be as big a job as when you and I wash the hair on our heads. So what I want to know is this. How often do all these hairy-faced men wash their faces?
I think you've probably already worked out who the best reader of this book is. Simon Callow, obvs. Now it's time to find out which is the best reading of this book. I can just hear you groaning through the screen. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist making a joke like that. Judy Bennett seems rather flat and monotonous and makes a lot of the parts sound sort of the same as each other.
The first child I knew who disappeared was called Ragnhild Hansen. Ragnhild was about 8 at the time, and she was playing with her little sister on the lawn. Their mother, who was baking bread in the kitchen, came outside for a breath of air. "Where's Ragnhild?" she asked. "She went away with the tall lady," the little sister said.
The brilliant Simon Callow strikes again. I love the voice he does for the Grand High Witch in this version. He sounds like he's got something stuck in his throat.
The brilliant snake's eyes that were set so deep in that dreadful, rotting, worm-eaten face glared unblinkingly at the witches who sat facing her. "You may remove your gloves," she shouted.
Richard Briers could have done better in his reading, as he doesn't really emote much.
The Grand High Witch told them her room was number 454, right? Right, she said. Well, my room is number 554. Mine, 554, is on the 5th floor, so hers, 454, will be on the 4th floor.
Lynn Redgrave has a lot of variety in her voices and brings them to life without sounding condescending.
For all you know, a witch might be living next door to you right now. Or she might be the woman with the bright eyes who sat opposite you on the bus this morning. She might be the lady with the dazzling smile who offered you a sweet from a white paper bag in the street before lunch. She might even... and this will make you jump. She might even be your lovely school teacher who is reading these words to you at this very moment.
Miranda Richardson is the perfect narrator for a book like this. She's extremely funny, not that you didn't know that already, and having already done audiobooks of Dr. Seuss and Francesca Simon's Horrid Henry stories, it was only a matter of time before she ended up in the world of Roald Dahl. She spends a lot of time screaming into the mic when she's reading the Grand High Witches bits, channeling her most famous character, the Queen from Blackadder, but somehow made even more over the top. Not that I think that's even possible.
The Grand High Witch took a quick step forward, and when she spoke again, it was in a voice that made my blood run cold.
A stupid witch who answers back must burn until her bones are black,
she screamed. No, no, begged the witch in the front row. The Grand High Witch went on.
A foolish witch without a brain must sizzle in the fiery flame.
Save me, cried the wretched witch in the front row.
Lolliadophope lacks emotion and seems rather miscast here.
In fairy tales, witches always wear silly black hats and black cloaks, and they ride on broomsticks. But this is not a fairy tale. This is about real witches. The most important thing you should know about real witches is this. Listen very carefully. Never forget what is coming next. Real witches dress in ordinary clothes and look very much like ordinary women. They live in ordinary houses and they work in ordinary jobs.
I think the winner is pretty obvious from the get-go. Gotta be Miranda Richardson, though Simon Callow does take the silver medal. I've got a lot to talk about here, so I'd better get on with it before the unknown comes for me. James Bolam's reading is just alright, I guess. It's not all that bad, but there's not much that stands out.
As soon as everyone was safely in, the Oompa Loompas pushed the boat away from the bank and began to row swiftly downriver. "Hey there, Mike TV," shouted Mr. Wonka. "Please don't lick the boat with your tongue. It'll only make it sticky." "Daddy," said Veruca Salt, "I want a boat like this. I want you to buy me a big pink boiled sweet boat exactly like Mr. Wonka's. I want lots of Oompa Loompas to row me about, and I want a chocolate river, and I want..." "She wants a good kick in the pants," whispered Grandpa Joe to Charlie.
Eric Idle seems like the ideal narrator for this. He has this perfect madcap delivery that you'll instantly recognise is his own, especially when he's reading Mr. Wonka's bits.
"Fizzy lifting drinks," it said on the next door. "Oh, those are fabulous," cried Mr. Wonka. "They fill you with bubbles, and the bubbles are full of a special kind of gas, and this gas is so terrifically lifting that it lifts you right off the ground, just like a balloon, and up you go until your head hits the ceiling, and there you stay." "But how do you come down again?" asked little Charlie. "You do a burp, of course," said Mr. Wonka. "You do a great big long, rude burp, and up comes the gas, and down comes you."
But as for Douglas Hodge, having been in a Sam Mendes stage musical, gives a brilliant performance. He provides different voices for each character, so different, in fact, that no two characters sound alike.
"Isn't it wonderful?" whispered Charlie. "Hasn't it got a wonderful taste, Grandpa?" "I could eat the whole field," said Grandpa Joe, grinning with delight. "I could go on all fours like a cow and eat every blade of grass in the field." "Try a buttercup," cried Mr. Wonka. "They're even nicer." Suddenly the air was filled with screams of excitement. The screams came from Veruca Salt. She was pointing frantically to the other side of the river. "Look! Look over there!" she screamed. "What is it? He's moving. He's walking. It's a little person. It's a little man. Down there below the waterfall."
He actually seems to have taken a leaf out of Kerry Shale's book. Shale, for reasons known only to himself, gives Mr. Wonka a half-German, half-Indian accent.
"This is the most important room in the entire factory. All my most secret new inventions are cooking and simmering in here. Old Thicklegruber would give his front teeth to be allowed inside just for 3 minutes. So would Prodnose and Slugworth and all the other rotten chocolate makers. But now, listen to me. I want no messing about when you go in. No touching, no meddling, and no tasting. Is that agreed?
David Tennant is no stranger to audiobooks, having narrated Harry McClary and How to Train Your Dragon and many others that if I started listing, I'd be here till Christmas. But he seems more than a little out of place with this book. And I'm not sure why.
These two very old people are the father and mother of Mr. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine. And these two very old people are the father and mother of Mrs. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina. This is Mr. Bucket. This is Mrs. Bucket. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket have a small boy whose name is Charlie Bucket. This is Charlie. How do you do? And how do you do? And how do you do again?
Choosing the best reader for this one is quite difficult, actually, but I'm gonna give Roald Dahl himself gold medal, then Eric Idle silver, and Douglas Hodge bronze. With most of the original narrators of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory coming back again to read its sequel, that would mean I've got slightly less to talk about for this one. I think I could probably talk about it all in one breath. Here goes nothing. Jonathan Cecil is just alright, Eric Idle, James Bolam and Douglas Hodge all carry on very well from where they left off in the last book, and Sacha Dhawan, and I'm probably mispronouncing his last name, sounds like he's really enjoying himself reading the story, and I do like the voices he does for the 4 grandparents.
He pressed a brown button. The elevator shuddered, and then with a fearful whooshing noise, it shot vertically upward like a rocket. Everybody clutched hold of everybody else, and as the great machine gathered speed, the rushing, whooshing sound of the wind outside grew louder and louder, and shriller, until it became a piercing shriek, and you had to yell to make yourself heard.
So I think I'd have to say the winner for that one is probably going to have to be Sacha Dhawan. An autobiography is a book a person writes about his own life, and it is usually full of all sorts of boring details. This is not an autobiography. I would never write a history of myself. I decided to group both volumes of Dahl's memoirs in the same category, as in most cases they're both narrated by the same person, with the exceptions of Sir Ian Holmes' reading of Boy and the Dahl's reading of Going Solo. Andrew Zachs tones down his zaniness a bit, because he knows that this is still the story of someone's life. Sir Derek Jacobi knows he's not just reading anyone's autobiography, so he makes the listening experience a little bit more fun.
When he forbade them to go, they ran away from home, and somehow or other the two of them managed to work their way to France on a cargo ship. From Calais they went to Paris, and in Paris they agreed to separate because each of them wished to be independent of the other.
And Dan Stevens reads as though he knew Dahl personally.
Both of them, of course, were completely dotty. Everyone on the ship was dotty, but none, as it turned out, was quite as dotty as my cabin companion, U.N. Savoury. The first sign of his dottiness was revealed to me one evening as our ship was running between Malta and Port Said.
So the best narrator? Gotta be Derek Jacobi. Now for another whistle-stop review. Both Richard E. Grant and Noel Fielding understand that this story is told from the perspective of a young child. And that's what they both do in their respective readings to a great extent.
We all began to feel just a little bit nervous. "What's he like, this Duke?" the Giraffe asked me. I don't know, I said, but he's very, very famous and very rich. People say he has 25 gardeners just to look after his flower beds.
I know the ground floor used to once be a shop, because I can still read the faded lettering across the front, which says, The Grubber. My mother has told me that in our part of the country in the olden days, a grubber was another name for a sweet shop.
Hugh Laurie's version is quite literally set to music, and he makes the voices for each character sound vastly different.
The chauffeur said, His Grace, the Duke of Hampshire, has instructed me to deliver this envelope to the Ladderless Window Cleaning Company.
Well, that's us,
cried the monkey. The giraffe said, Be so good as to open the envelope and read us the letter. The chauffeur unfolded the letter and began to read.
So the best narration? I think I've got to go with Roald Dahl himself. Sit kub sau osla detpada otni a malif, tub ilno roth noisy velet. Sti ilautka ton flardab. Michael Palin has a lovely, relaxing delivery of this story, not unlike his narration from the Clangers reboot.
When he had finished, Mr. Hoppy, in his enthusiasm, had bought no less than 140 tortoises, and he carried them home in baskets, 10 or 15 at a time. He had to make a lot of trips, and he was quite exhausted at the end of it all, but it was worth it. Boy, was it worth it. And what an amazing sight his living room was when they were all in there together. The floor was swarming with tortoises of different sizes, some walking slowly about and exploring, some munching cabbage leaves, others drinking water from a big shallow dish.
Joanna Lumley sounds like she's really enjoying herself reading out the backwards poem. Now, Geoffrey Palmer's reading was recorded in 2009, but it wasn't officially released to the public until 2023, which was 3 years after he died. It's a bittersweet recording and a lovely swan song from dear old Geoffrey.
Oh, if only, he kept telling himself, if only he could do something tremendous like saving her life or rescuing her from a gang of armed thugs. If only he could perform some great feat that would make him a hero in her eyes. If only.
Quentin Blake, much like Roald Dahl himself, reads the story in that lovely grandfatherly style.
Esio Trot, Teg regib regib. Emok no, Esio Trot. Wog poo, Fup poo, Toos poo, Knurps poo, Wolb poo, Lose poo, Egrog, Elzug, Futz, Plug, Tup no taff, Esio Trot, Tup no taff, Tegno, Elbog, Doof.
And I know Sanjeev Bhaskar personally, so I have to say something good about him. And he did not disappoint here. He reads the story in a very calm manner.
Mr. Hoppy lived in a small flat high up in a tall concrete building. He lived alone. He'd always been a lonely man, and now that he was retired from work, he was more lonely than ever.
And the winner is... Oof, they're all really good. Don't ask me to pick one. But if I had to, I'd give it a tie between Quentin and Sanjeev. Roald Dahl dedicated this book to doctors everywhere, but gave a warning to them saying, do not try to make this medicine yourself, it could be dangerous. And he was right, because a couple of years ago an actual medical magazine made the medicine for themselves and did some sciencey tests on it, and they said that if ingested it would cause vomiting kidney injury, convulsions, and other severe health problems, including what they described as the most likely clinical outcome, death. And they said in the report that the overall outcome for Grandma would be fatal, catastrophic physiological collapse. I am not making this up. But anyway, despite never being released on CD or tape, this is quite a famous reading that many people remember, as it featured on CBBC's Jackanory. Rick Mayall, being the nutty bastard that he was, seemed like the perfect narrator for what is perhaps Roald Dahl's zaniest book.
There, on his mother's dressing table was yet another lovely aerosol can. Helga's hair set. Hold 12 inches away from the hair and spray lightly. Spray lightly. He squirted the whole lot into the saucepan. He did enjoy squirting those aerosols. There's a bottle of perfume there called Flowers of Turnips, which smelt of old cheese. Ugh. In it went.
The interesting thing about this next version is that on the cover it's credited to the wrong person, Derek Griffiths, the kids' TV presenter, rather than Richard Griffiths, Uncle Vernon from Harry Potter. But anyway, Richard's reading is very solid, and I like when he's reading the labels of the animal medicines and he puts on plenty of silly voices.
I'll be burned to a crisp.
June Whitfield's reading is pretty satisfactory. There's nothing really that makes it stand out, but I guess it's pretty good.
In the bathroom, he gazed longingly at the famous and dreaded medicine cupboard, but he didn't go near it. It was the only thing in the entire house he was forbidden to touch. He had made solemn promises to his parents about this, and he wasn't going to break them. There were things in there, they'd told him, that could actually kill a person. And although he was out to give Grandma a pretty fiery mouthful, he didn't really want a dead body on his hands.
Richard E. Grant, unfortunately, doesn't put much effort into his reading. When he does the voice for Grandma, he sounds too polite, and he's portraying her as like a stereotypical grandma, which of course this character isn't.
I'll stir my own tea, thank you very much, she said. Fetch me a teaspoon.
Though I do like when he's reading the bit where Grandma gets her first dose. He sounds like E.T. being strangled. Sir Derek Jacobi does just fine in his recording and carries the story very well.
The giant saucepan had been completely emptied the day before because there had been so many sheep and pigs and cows and bullocks to be dosed. "But why do we need more, Dad?" George asked. "We've done all our own animals, and we've made Grandma feel as frisky as a ferret, even though she does have to sleep in the barn."
Ramesh Ranganathan reads the story in his typical deadpan fashion, which unfortunately means he makes all the characters sound literally the same as each other. I'm not exaggerating here.
Grandma, who was dozing in a chair by the window, opened one wicked little eye and said, "Now you heard what your mother said, George. Don't forget my medicine." "No, Grandma," George said, "and just try to behave yourself for once while she's away." "Yes, Grandma," George said.
To quote himself and Anne Robinson before him,
"You are the weakest link. Goodbye."
So the best reading of this book, I think it would have to be a three-way tie between Mayall, Griffiths and Jacobi. This is the one that started this whole discussion. I found myself saying there are two types of people regarding this book. The ones who prefer the reading by Timothy West and Prunella Scales, and the ones who prefer Grieg, Mangan and Margulies. Little did I know there were plenty more readings to listen to. Creepy music and visuals aside, Tim and Prue, in my opinion, read these poems way too fast, although they do have excellent rapport between them.
When little Snow White's mother died, the king, her father, up and cried,
"Oh, what a nuisance, what a life. Now I must find another wife."
It's never easy for a king to find himself that sort of thing. He wrote to every magazine and said,
I'm looking for a queen.
They don't have much pacing where it's appropriate, like they did when they narrated the Tales of Beatrix Potter on cassette, and those are actually quite good in themselves. And they also featured the likes of Patricia Routledge and Sir Michael Hordern. And I know it's not particularly relevant to this discussion, but the music for the newer one is leaps and bounds better. The music for the older one, which I described in my Scares of Childhood video as demented versions of nursery rhymes, doesn't seem to work very well and only focuses on the dark aspect of the poems, while the newer music is the perfect combination of mischievous and frightening and fits the stories perfectly. I once heard someone describe Roald Dahl as dark Dr. Seuss. They're very much the difference between scary and creepy. I know it seems like they're the same thing, but trust me, they're not. Scary has an element of fun to it, like a ghost train or Halloween trick-or-treating, while creepy to me means something that doesn't intend to frighten you, but still does. Like, those horrible horror movie dolls. Some of my favourite parts of this recording are Stephen Mangan screaming into the microphone.
No, stop! Stand back! He's coming in! Oh, look! That greasy greenish skin! The shining teeth! The greedy smile! It's Crocky Wook, the crocodile!
And Tamsin Greig giving a very angry-sounding delivery of the infamous dirty little slut line.
The prince cried, "Who's this dirty slut?"
People always tell me that Tamsin sounds very bored reading this, but I actually have to disagree. I decided to watch Dawn French and Martin Clune's reading without actually looking at it, because I knew that I'd get more than a little unnerved looking at the visuals, although they did keep a lot of the scary music. And I must say it was a joy to listen to. If only Universal would release this on cassette or CD or MP3 or something, because take away the visuals and it'd be really good.
Don't let your kids watch it!
And Martin Clunes does the most hilariously camp voice for the big bad wolf.
But Grandmama was small and tough, and Wolfie wailed,
"That's not enough. I haven't yet begun to feel that I've had a decent meal."
He ran around the kitchen yelping,
"I've got to have another helping,"
and added with a frightful leer,
"I'm therefore going to wait right here till little Miss Red Riding Hood comes home from walking in the wood."
I haven't heard all of Pam Ferris and Geoffrey Palmer's reading, but from what I've heard, they take turns to between each other to read the rhyming couplets. And anyway, Pam Ferris is a legend. She's part of the Roald Dahl universe as well, of course, playing Miss Trunchbull in Matilda. Actually, come to think about it, I'm not surprised at all that she's called Miss Trunchbull rather than Mrs. Trunchbull.
No animal is half so vile as Crocky Wook the crocodile.
On Saturdays, he likes to crunch 6 juicy children for his lunch.
And he especially enjoys just 3 of each, 3 girls, 3 boys.
He smears the boys, to make them hot, with mustard from the mustard pot.
But mustard doesn't go with girls. It tastes all wrong with plaits and curls. With them, what goes extremely well is butterscotch and caramel. It's such a super marvellous treat when boys are hot and girls are sweet.
At least that's Crocky's point of view. He ought to know. He's had a few.
Tim Key does not emote at all during his reading.
Quite literally, we jumped all over from Scotland to the cliffs of Dover. Above the cliffs, we stopped for tea, and Toad said, gazing at the sea, "What do you say we take a chance and jump from England into France?" I said, "Oh dear, do you think we ought to? I'd hate to finish in the water." But toads, you'll find, don't give a wink for what we little children think. He didn't bother to reply. He jumped. You should have seen us fly. We simply soared across the sea, the marvellous Mr. Toad and me. Then down we came, and down, and landed in a brand new town.
And Alan Cummings' character voices seem a bit flat.
I guess you think you know this story. You don't. The real one's much more gory. The phony one, the one you know, was cooked up years and years ago and made to sound all soft and sappy, just to keep the children happy.
And therein lies the problem. These books don't work as well when read by just one person. You kind of need someone else to balance it out. So the best reading, in my opinion, you don't have to agree with me, I'm just saying it's my opinion, Grieg, Mangan and Marvellous. This is a lovely, calming story that all fathers should read to their kids at least once. While I mentioned earlier that Timothy West doesn't particularly fit well with the two poetry anthologies, with this book he feels like he's much more in his comfort zone.
You will learn as you get older, just as I learned that autumn, that no father is perfect. Grown-ups are complicated creatures, full of quirks and secrets. Some have quirkier quirks and deeper secrets than others, but all of them, including one's own parents, have 2 or 3 private habits hidden up their sleeves that would probably make you gasp if you knew about them. The rest of this story is about a most private and secret habit my father had, and about the strange adventures that it led us both into.
It's almost as good as, if not better than, his Beatrix Potter tapes. Peter Serafinovich's reading is pretty satisfactory and he understands the characters well.
Now here's the thing, he said. Here's the first big secret. Ah, but it's more than a secret, Danny. It's the most important discovery in the whole history of poaching. He edged a shade closer to me. His face was pale in the pale yellow glow from the lamp in the ceiling, but his eyes were shining like stars.
Alfred Enoch sounds absolutely wonderful reading this book, giving an extremely mellow and relaxing reading.
But my father didn't seem to mind. I think that all the love he had felt for my mother when she was alive, he now lavished upon me. During my early years, I never had a moment's unhappiness or illness. And here I am on my 5th birthday. I was now a scruffy little boy, as you can see, with grease and oil all over me. But that was because I spent all day in the workshop helping my father with the cars.
And I can't seem to find the Will Young reading anywhere, so I think I better leave right now and tell you who I think is the best. I'm gonna say Timothy West takes the crown for me. You rock this one, Tim. This very short book, intended for much younger readers than most of Dahl's output, only takes about 20 minutes on average to read, but that doesn't mean the recordings can't have fun with what they do. Quite the opposite, in fact. Each recording brings something new to the table. I find Roger Blake's narration quite unsettling. He gives the characters some rather unusual and slightly unfitting voices.
Then, with a crashing of branches, Trunky the elephant came rushing out of the jungle.
"That's not a bench you are going to sit on," he bellowed. "It's the enormous crocodile, and he wants to eat you all up."
Trunky trotted over to the spot where the enormous crocodile was standing, and quick as a flash, he wrapped his trunk around the crocodile's tail and hoisted him up into the air. "Hey, let me go!" yelled the enormous crocodile, who was now dangling upside down. "Let me go! Let me go!"
"No," Trunky said, "I will not let you go. We've all had quite enough of your clever tricks."
The same problem that Dave Benson Phillips suffers from, despite any more quirky tone to his reading. And this is more of an editing problem, but Dave Benson Phillips' reading can be extremely out of sync with the visuals, which can result in some slightly awkward sounding pauses and silences.
A gigantic creature was standing in the slimy, oozy mud on the riverbank. It was Humpy Rumpy, the hippopotamus. "Hello, hello," said Humpy Rumpy. "Where on earth are you off to at this time of day?" I have secret plans and clever tricks, said the crocodile. Oh dear, said Humpy Rumpy. I'll bet you're going to do something horrid. The enormous crocodile grinned at Humpy Rumpy and said, I'm going to fill my hungry, empty tummy with something yummy, 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 yummy. What's so yummy? Asked Humpy Rumpy. Try to guess, said the crocodile. It's something that walks on 2 legs. You don't mean, said Humpy Rumpy. You don't really mean you're going to eat a little child? Of course I am, said the crocodile. Oh, you horrid, greedy, grumptious brute, cried Humpy Rumpy. I hope you get caught and cooked and turned into crocodile soup.
The theme music as well doesn't really work. It's too goofy and seems more fitting for an 80s arcade game. Oh, Whizline Productions, you absolute pillocks. If I can include Rick Mayall's reading of George's Marvellous Medicine, then I thought I'd include this one too, both being from Jackanory. I do like listening to Lenny doing lots of funny voices.
A bit further on, he met Mugglewump, the monkey.
Hello, Crocky,
said the Mugglewump.
what are you up to now?
I have secret plans and clever tricks, said the crocodile.
Would you like some nuts?
Asked the Mugglewump. I have better things to eat than nuts, sniffed the crocodile. The sort of things that I'm going to eat have fingers, toenails, arms and legs and feet. Mugglewump went pale.
You aren't really going to gobble up a little child, are you?
He said. Of course I am, said the crocodile, clothes and all.
Oh, you horrid, hoggish croc,
cried the Mugglewump.
I hope the buttons and buckles will stick in your throat and choke you to death.
The crocodile grinned. I eat monkeys too, and quick as a flash with one bite of his huge jaws, he bit through the tree that Mugglewump was sitting in. But just in time, Mugglewump jumped into the next tree and swung away through the branches.
I like the way he portrays the crocodile himself as a sarcastic jerk. And when he does Humpy Rumpy, the hippopotamus, he sounds like he'd had his wisdom teeth taken out at the dentist. And he's still had his mouth frozen. What could be better than that?
Suddenly there was a tremendous whooshing noise. It was Humpy Rumpy. Look out, Toto, shouted Humpy Rumpy. Look out, Mary. That's not a coconut tree. It's the enormous crocodile, and he wants to eat you up. Humpy Rumpy charged straight at the enormous crocodile. Owie! Cried the crocodile. Help! Stop! Where am I? Toto and Mary ran back to the town as fast as they could. But crocodiles are tough. It's difficult for even a hippopotamus to hurt them.
Actually, I'll tell you what could be better than that. The way Stephen Fry interprets the character, because he gives him a Yorkshire accent.
Hello, hello, said Humpy Rumpy. Where on earth are you off to at this time of day? I have secret plans and clever tricks, said the crocodile. Oh dear, said Humpy Rumpy. I'll bet you're going to do something horrid.
Love him or loathe him, you've got to admit Stephen Fry gives the most excellent delivery of this story. I heard that the people who made the sound effects, or Foley art to give it its proper name, had a lot of fun making this one in particular. I'll stop talking for now and let them tell you about it themselves.
Some of the books we've actually been doing almost wild. I've just put the headphones on and gone for the story, and so we've been creating sound effects quite spontaneously.
Like the Enormous Crocodile.
Was a perfect example. Luke was wearing binaural microphones, and I was actually I performed the story in a run. It was so exciting.
The monkey through the trees.
Yeah.
The water stuff, and
for me, I think as again going back to the performance thing, some of the things that have really made me laugh and I've really enjoyed doing are the more vocal stuff, like the alligator chomping through things, or the monkey ha-ha-haing through trees and things like that. There was one when we were recording The Enormous Crocodile. I was doing this scene where the alligator's munching and crunching and crushing the children with a banana and a bit of peach and a stick of celery and a small tangerine in my hand, that all eventually ended up in my mouth being crushed and squished. And then I had to spat them out at the end. But I was so involved in the story and listening to it, I'd completely forgotten that Luke was stood right in front of me, and I spat the whole lot in his face, which was, I mean, and it sounded fantastic, but it was a lot of fun to do. Not to spit at him, just
One thing I like about this version, but at the same time find rather out of place, are the little hidden sound effects. For instance, here...
Oh, you horrid, hoggish crock, cried Mugglewump. You slimy creature! I hope the buttons and buckles all stick in your throat and choke you to death. The crocodile grinned up at Mugglewump.
You can just about hear someone coughing, and here...
I have secret plans and clever tricks, said the crocodile. You mean you've nasty plans and nasty tricks, said Trunky. You've never done a nice thing in your life.
There's a faint but there sound of someone laughing evilly. They're just some fun little Easter eggs for people with particularly good hearing. And of course, Tom Allen has his signature quirky delivery.
Children are bigger than fish, said the enormous crocodile. You get bigger helpings. You are greedy, the not-so-big one said. You're the greediest croc in the whole river. I'm the bravest croc in the whole river, said the enormous crocodile. I'm the only one who dares to leave the water and go through the jungle to the town to look for little children to eat.
So the best reading of this book? Well, it's between Lenny Henry and Stephen Fry. So I think I'm just going to have to call it a tie for this one.
Don't be mean, kids!
That wasn't much of an introduction, was it? But that's pretty much the story in a nutshell. I'm terribly frightened by Anne Clement's reading. Something just feels off about it. It's the one from the 4 Enchanting Stories DVD, which I mentioned in my Scares of Childhood video. Simply put, the animation style is weird, to say the least. And when you couple it up with the absolutely dire imitations of Quentin Blake's art, which looks like someone's wiped their own fecal matter on the drawings, you can see the reasons I put it at number 1. And Anne Clement's narration does absolutely nothing to help.
It must have been about this time that I, back in my own house, picked up the telephone and tried to call Philip. I wanted to see if the family was all right. Hello, I said. Said a voice at the other end.
I think it's because I find myself being slightly creeped out by RP accents. It's probably a generational thing, but it seems to me more like an unintentional case of analogue horror. I can't find the full version of Caroline Quentin's narration, but from what I've heard, it is pretty good.
And suddenly, a sort of flash comes out of me, a quick flash like something electric. It jumps out and touches the person who has made me cross. And after that, the magic finger is upon him or her, and things begin to happen. Well, the magic finger was now upon the whole of the Gregg family, and there was no taking it off again.
And in a similar vein to Enormous Crocodile, the theme music has a most unusual style. It does sound like it belongs in an 80s arcade game, but it isn't nearly as goofy. It makes me feel an emotion that doesn't even exist. Helen Lederer is very funny, as usual here. Kate Winslet, as with her reading of Matilda, does excellently with this one. I like her overall delivery, and she does provide us with some funny moments occasionally.
I cannot begin to tell you what happened after that, but if any of you are wondering whether Mrs. Winter is quite all right again now, the answer is no. And she never will be.
Oh, what am I like? Lock me up and throw away the key. And Zawe Ashton's reading is just fine.
The farm next to ours is owned by Mr. and Mrs. Gregg. The Greggs have 2 children, both of them boys. Their names are Philip and William. Sometimes I go over to their farm to play with them. I am a girl and I am 8 years old. Philip is also 8 years old. William is 3 years older. He is 10. What? Oh, all right then. He is 11.
So the best reader of this one, Kate Winslet strikes again. And finally... I decided to finish off with this one because it's Roald Dahl's last published book. I can't find the Richard Pascoe reading anywhere, unfortunately. Joanna Lumley carries the suspense of the story very well, whispering some lines and saying others in a more frantic manner. I absolutely love Bill Bailey, so I expected a lot from him here. His reading is actually very good.
Very, very slowly, he walked forward into the great forest. Giant trees were soon surrounding him on all sides, and their branches made an almost solid roof high above his head, blotting out the sky. Here and there, little shafts of sunlight shone through gaps in the roof. There was not a sound anywhere. It was like being among the dead men in an enormous empty green cathedral.
And last, but by no means least, Joel Fry. Quite fitting that this is the last one, as it literally only came out this year. He encapsulates the innocence of little Billy extremely well.
On this sunny summer afternoon, little Billy was kneeling on a chair in the living room, gazing out through the window at the wonderful world beyond. His mother was in the kitchen doing the ironing, and although the door was open, she couldn't see him. Every now and again, his mother would call out to him, saying, "Little Billy, what are you up to in there?" And little Billy would always call back and say, "I'm being good, Mummy."
And the best reader of this one is probably either Bill Bailey or Joel Fry. I'm not sure which one. And that just about wraps things up. I've gone through all of the books that have been adapted into multiple versions, so I didn't include anything like Over to You, or Rhyme Stew, The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, or, what's the other one? Well, whatever it is, I just went for the more popular ones. So to sum it all up, it seems as though these readings get better with time. Because the 2013 versions I find are very strong, and the ones that were released in like the 80s aren't nearly as good as people make them out to be. So that's all I have to say regarding Roald Dahl. And if you like what you see, don't forget to share it around. I'll see you in the next video. Nothing shone out of Mrs. Twits' face. Oh my god, my stomach is very loud today. I used to listen to the Simon Callow reading of this book on repeat whenever I couldn't sleep. So predictably, what? David Tennant is no stranger to audiobooks. He's narrated Harry McClary and How to Train Your Dragon and so many more others that if I started listening, I think it's because I find myself being slightly creeped out by RP accents. It's probably a generational thing. But it seems more like a case of... an unintentional case